The historic palace corridors were buzzing with anticipation as the staff prepared for a night of absolute glitter, gold, and centuries-old royal ceremony. But behind one heavily locked wooden door, away from the prying eyes of courtiers and assistants, King Charles made an unyielding decision that turned the entire evening into a silent, freezing battlefield before it even began. Before the state dinner could properly commence, before the global cameras captured polished, smiling faces for the international media, Charles issued a shocking order to Prince Harry. He commanded his younger son to immediately hand back Prince Philip's most private and personal medal. This was a symbol so deeply intertwined with family trust that its sudden demanded return felt far less like standard palace protocol and much more like a deliberate, cutting punishment meant to draw a definitive line. Charles did not make this heavy order lightly or in a sudden fit of anger. He sat at his large desk with the official family files open directly before him, one aging hand resting firmly near the edges of the historic pages. The king knew very well that the upcoming state dinner was meant to show absolute global unity, because a state dinner is a formal royal meal held specifically for important foreign guests, deliberately designed to make the monarchy look completely steady, unified, and unbreakable. That was precisely why the timing of this demand cut so devastatingly deeply into the family dynamic. The palace desperately wanted calm faces, polished manners, and absolute emotional control for the public eye. Yet the reigning monarch was preparing to send his younger son a direct command that could easily turn royal dignity into bitter public humiliation right before the opening toasts were raised. Harry received the cold message in absolute silence inside his designated private room. He did not immediately argue with the messenger, nor did he reach out to take the official envelope from the aide's trembling hands. Instead, he stared at the written words as if they had physically taken all the air right out of the room. The medal in question was not just another standard military honor or a shiny piece of decoration to be worn on a jacket. It was one of Prince Philip's most intensely private symbols, a family-held mark tied to raw service, immense personal sacrifice, and the incredibly hard, unyielding code of absolute loyalty that the old Duke of Edinburgh had lived by his entire life. A medal in strict royal terms is always far more than a simple piece of metal decoration. It can carry deep living memory, military rank, grandfatherly affection, and ultimate judgment. Harry understood that reality completely, and Charles understood it just as deeply. That was exactly why the sudden order felt so incredibly brutal to the exiled prince. The old clock on the palace wall shifted once with a heavy click, then completely stopped. Even that tiny, routine mechanical movement seemed far too loud in the suffocating quiet. Harry knew he was expected inside the main palace hall very soon, expected to appear fully composed, expected to carry himself like absolutely nothing out of the ordinary had happened behind the scenes. But something massive had happened. The king had officially ordered him to return Philip's private medal before the state dinner could even begin, making the sharp command absolutely impossible to ignore or bypass. Harry's face tightened instantly, not with explosive fury at first, but with profound, freezing shock. The small physical object had suddenly become a final, unyielding verdict on exactly where he stood with the crown. Charles remained isolated behind the closed doors, carrying his late father's immense memory heavily in his chest. The monarch had acted firmly, but the thick silence that followed the decision felt significantly heavier than the decision itself. As Harry prepared his mind to answer, a single burning question moved silently through the long, dim corridor. Had the king truly chosen this harsh path alone, or had another powerful hand pushed him toward the emotional edge? But before the medal could be physically returned to the palace vaults, the entire royal household had to face the painful, buried truth of why this small, simple piece of metal carried enough emotional power to deeply wound an entire family. To outsiders and casual royal observers, it was only a piece of polished metal on a ribbon. To the House of Windsor, it was a final, fraying thread connecting 3 whole generations of royal men who had never truly learned how to speak plainly to one another about love, duty, or disappointment. Charles saw the medal as his late father's private, sacred trust that must be guarded at all costs. Harry saw it as a surviving, beautiful link to the strong grandfather who once truly understood his rebellious nature. Meanwhile, William saw it as something dangerously close to being misused for public relations or personal leverage outside the institution. Charles knew the heavy command had already gone far too long to be softened or taken back. The exact moment the message left his hand, it completely stopped being a private, emotional family request and officially became a rigid royal line drawn through blood and history. He stared down at the complex dinner seating plan, seeing names, grand titles, and high positions, but feeling absolutely nothing but the vast, empty space stretching between a father and a son. A state dinner was supposed to prove to the entire world that the British monarchy could still stand tall above personal pain, above global scandal, and above deep family fracture. Yet the king understood perfectly that one single missing medal might speak infinitely louder to the press than every single polished, elegant speech prepared for that grand night. Harry felt the order as a physical wound before he ever even touched the velvet case. He paced back and forth in the private room, carrying the old, familiar ache of being constantly judged by a family that still knew exactly where and when to strike to cause the most damage. Philip had never been soft with him during his life. The old Duke had never offered comfort in easy, sweet words, but there had always been a strange, unspoken understanding between them, shaped by military service, blunt humor, and a shared dislike of emotional performance. To Harry, that medal was not a trophy. It was undeniable proof that someone from the old, rigid world had once seen him clearly for who he was. William saw the entire situation differently. The Prince of Wales firmly believed that Philip's sacred memory had become far too dangerous in Harry's hands. Not because their grandfatherly bond was false, but because it could easily be turned into a public claim against the working family. Philip's entire global legacy had been built on absolute discipline, quiet restraint, a strong military identity, and a core belief that privilege meant absolutely nothing without lifelong service. That mattered immensely because the working monarchy lived or died by that exact same strict code every single day. If Harry carried that specific medal while standing at a massive distance from royal duty, William feared the symbol would say something to the public that the crown simply could not allow. Camilla watched Charles hesitate at his desk and understood the immediate danger in that hesitation. She did not need to raise her voice or cause a scene. She only reminded him quietly that a king could love his son deeply and still fully protect the ancient institution. The queen consort knew that sentiment could easily become a fatal weakness when the world was watching, and she saw how close Charles was to confusing mercy with surrender. Her words did not remove his deep pain. They sharpened it to a fine point. Charles remained torn between the father who wanted to spare Harry's feelings and the monarch who knew Philip's name could not be dragged into another family battle. Harry remained alone with the sting of rejection, believing his family had taken a private memory and turned it into a public judgment. William remained convinced that the medal had become a shield Harry had no right to carry into a royal ceremony. And as the silence thickened around all three men, the emotional stakes sharpened when an old family incident resurfaced, one that turned Philip's medal from a sweet memory into a royal fault line. And that fault line had not appeared overnight. It began with one private moment that everyone inside the palace later remembered as the true point of no return. The crisis did not begin on the night of the state dinner. It began weeks earlier during a private memorial reception at Windsor, when Harry raised Philip's name in a way that made the entire room go completely still. A single sentence spoken too sharply and heard by the wrong people transformed a family keepsake into a royal emergency. From that moment, Charles knew the medal could no longer remain untouched. Harry had not meant to sound careful. He had meant to sound wounded. Standing near Philip's portrait with old memories pressing against fresh bitterness, he referred to the medal as proof that his grandfather knew where loyalty truly lived. The words landed with a force no one could pretend to miss. Windsor was not just a royal residence. It was one of the family's most symbolic homes, a place where private grief and public duty often met behind closed doors. That made the comment more dangerous. It turned remembrance into accusation. Charles heard it first as a father, then he heard it as king. He understood why Harry reached for Philip's name, because grief often searches for allies among the dead. But the monarch also knew why the room had changed. Philip's memory did not belong to one wounded son, and the medal was never meant to become a weapon in a family war. Charles kept his face controlled, yet the silence around him tightened. The old Duke's legacy had been pulled into the open, and everyone present knew it, and reacted with the cold pain of someone protecting a sacred boundary. Her face hardened not because she lacked sympathy, but because she understood exactly what had been done. Later, in a private conversation with Charles, she told him that their father's symbols must not become weapons. The princess had lived close enough to Philip's code to know its meaning. Service came before self. Restraint came before drama. Loyalty was not a phrase to be thrown across a room. William said almost nothing in that moment, and that made his silence sharper. The prince watched Harry walk away from the portrait, and his stillness carried more judgment than anger ever could. He believed the remark had crossed a line, not loudly, not publicly enough for scandal, but deeply enough for the family to remember it. Harry had spoken from pain, yet William heard strategy inside the sorrow, and that fear would not leave him. Charles later learned the matter had grown even more urgent. Harry intended to wear the medal-linked insignia near the state dinner reception, and an insignia is a small ceremonial mark that signals honor, rank, or connection. Suddenly, the issue was not buried in a private reception. It was moving toward a public royal event. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A handwritten note from Philip's old private secretary stating that the medal was never meant to be displayed during moments of family dispute. Charles held that note like a sentence he had been avoiding for years. It gave him authority, but it also trapped him. If he ignored it, Philip's wishes would look weak. If he obeyed it, Harry would feel cast out all over again. The king finally understood that the medal had stopped being memory. It had become the battlefield. By the time Harry arrived before the dinner, the palace was no longer managing etiquette. It was preparing for a father and son to collide. The air in the private royal quarters grew increasingly thick, almost suffocating, as father and son stood just a few inches apart, separated only by the heavy mahogany table that had seen generations of royal history. This precise confrontation happened entirely away from the grand crystal chandeliers, away from the sweeping classical music, and completely away from the polished, practiced smiles waiting downstairs in the main banquet hall. Charles and Harry stood alone in a room with absolutely no cameras, no public onlookers, and no easy emotional escape for either man. On the polished wooden table between them lay the physical demand that neither man wanted to articulate aloud for too long, a silent but absolute ultimatum. Return Prince Philip's private medal before walking into the grand state dinner, or do not walk into that dining room at all. Charles spoke first, his voice carrying the deep, raspy strain of father who found the heavy silence far more painful than the brutal order itself. He desperately kept his tone flat and controlled, but the immense institutional pressure underneath his words could not be hidden from his son. The king told Harry firmly that Philip's sacred honor could not be casually carried into a public room while the core family unit remained so deeply fractured and divided. A state dinner, in the plainest terms of international diplomacy, is never just a simple meal among elites. It is a highly calculated royal display of absolute unity before foreign guests and global dignitaries, where every single minor gesture, every piece of jewelry, and every missing ribbon is instantly read by experts as a specific political message. That was precisely why the missing medal mattered so intensely right now. If Harry entered the banquet hall wearing it, the entire evening would instantly stop being about British diplomacy and instead become a silent, loud public argument about royal loyalty and personal rebellion. Harry did not explode into a loud fit of rage, and that quiet response made the internal tension in the room significantly worse. He merely looked at his father with a look of betrayal so incredibly sharp it required no shouting at all, then asked in a quiet whisper whether his grandfather's personal memory was now being systematically taken from him just like everything else had been. The quiet words struck Charles significantly harder than any loud outburst of anger ever would have. The reigning monarch had mentally prepared his defenses for loud resistance, perhaps even aggressive defiance, but he had not prepared himself for that specific type of raw, vulnerable family pain. Harry was not defending palace protocol or military hierarchy in that moment. He was desperately defending the very last private, emotional link he believed still belonged exclusively to him as a grandson. Charles slowly placed Philip's old, faded note on the table between them. The fragile paper carried no loud, aggressive command, yet its mere appearance completely changed the entire atmosphere of the room. It was a private, written instruction from the past, a physical reminder left behind by the old Duke's private secretary stating clearly that the medal was never meant to be displayed during moments of intense family dispute. A private instruction in royal life means a personal direction left completely outside public law, but held firmly inside the unwritten rules of royal life. Such ancient words can carry the heavy weight of lifelong duty. Charles wanted Harry to understand that this was not merely a cruel, vindictive punishment from a father, but rather a necessary act of protection for the legacy of the crown itself. But Harry heard something infinitely colder through his grief. He heard absolute, undeniable proof that even his most sacred family memories had been completely weaponized and turned against him by the institution. The official palace aide outside the heavy door waited without moving a single muscle, checking his watch as the official dinner clock ticked down. Important foreign guests were already arriving in the grand courtyard below, and every single passing minute pushed the palace closer to a massive, uncontrolled public exposure. Harry slowly reached his hand out toward the velvet metal case, then stopped completely. He did not open the case to look inside, nor did he officially surrender it over to his father's hands. He simply let his trembling hand remain hovering right there, caught directly between deep personal grief and institutional obedience, between the grandson who desperately wanted to hold on to a memory and the prince who knew the crown had already decided his fate weeks ago. Charles watched him closely, and for one terrible, silent moment, the father and the son looked less like bitter enemies and much more like the lonely survivors of the exact same deep family wound. Harry finally lowered his hand away from the desk. The thick silence stretched so incredibly long that it seemed to leave a lasting mark on both men's faces. When the heavy wooden door finally opened, no one waiting outside immediately knew whether the prince had actually obeyed the king's command. But the definitive answer was already moving silently through the palace corridors in the exact way the staff held their breath as people walked past. Prince William was already waiting patiently just down the dim corridor, his posture rigid and unmoving. And in that precise corridor, the heavy decision officially stopped being only Charles's personal burden as a father, and instead became a defining test of who truly held the real power inside the modern British monarchy. Kings are the ones who officially give the public orders, but actual royal power rarely moves through just one single hand alone. Behind Charles's direct command stood an incredibly complex, invisible web of memory, institutional duty, royal inheritance, and deep-seated fear. It was a profound fear that Philip's lifelong legacy might be pulled down into a messy, public family feud that the monarchy simply could not survive in the modern media age. As the official dinner clock moved closer to its very first royal toast, William and Camilla each understood perfectly that the small medal had become far more than just Harry's personal possession. It had officially become a high-stakes test of total institutional control. William waited near the corridor entrance, carrying his immense tension like a locked, silent blade inside his chest. He did not step forward to join the conversation, nor did he ask the passing aides what had actually happened behind that closed door. The prince understood deeply that this still had to be seen as Charles's official command, and the king had to be perceived by the household as the one solely holding the firm line against rebellion. Yet William also knew exactly why that specific line mattered for the future of his own reign. If Harry walked into that state dinner wearing Philip's medal, the evening would immediately stop being about royal stability and instead become a silent, media-driven argument about who had the ultimate right to claim the old duke's legacy. Princess stood entirely apart from the others in the waiting area, and her complete emotional restraint made her deep grief even clearer to those around her. She did not treat the medal as mere physical property or a piece of valuable jewelry. She treated it as a final, sacred boundary of respect. Philip's personal honors carried an immense emotional authority across the entire family, especially with her and William, because those specific objects represented so much more than mere aristocratic rank. Personal honors are private symbols connected strictly to deep military service, absolute trust, and quiet family duty. And inside the reality of royal life, they can carry a meaning that is infinitely deeper than any public title or grand duchy, and knew that reality better than anyone else alive. Her father had lived his entire long life by discipline, not by cheap public display. He had firmly believed that true loyalty was proven through silence, personal sacrifice, and hard, uncomplaining service to crown. Camilla watched Charles from a very careful, supportive distance, and understood the immediate political danger of any further hesitation. She had already told him quietly behind closed doors that allowing Harry to keep the medal for the evening just to keep the peace would look like ultimate weakness to the public. After the incident at the Windsor Memorial, the Queen Consort did not need to sound cruel to be incredibly firm. She simply reminded the reigning monarch that soft family sentiment could never guide the crown when a powerful family symbol was at risk of becoming a public weapon against the family. Charles heard her words clearly, and the truth in them hurt him deeply. A father could easily forgive a wandering son, but a king had to protect the ancient institution at all costs. An official palace document later confirmed what everyone inside the inner circle already feared. Under total family authority, any controversial medal could be legally removed from Harry's possession before any official ceremonial appearance could take place. That specific legal reality mattered immensely because a ceremonial appearance is never merely about attending a party. It is a highly publicized royal moment where clothing, historical honors, and specific room placement all send deliberate messages to the global press. If Harry carried the medal, the room would read it as a silent royal approval of his choices. If Charles stopped him, the deep family fracture would become completely undeniable to the world. There was absolutely no painless choice left for the king to make. William remained fully ready to support his father if Harry openly refused the order, and remained fixed in quiet, stoic sorrow, completely unwilling to let her father's name be bent by modern family conflict. Camilla remained absolutely certain that the monarchy could not survive if every single private family wound was allowed to become a public claim. And Charles, completely caught in the middle of all of them, understood that his order was no longer backed by simple emotion alone. It now officially carried the total, crushing force of family judgment, palace authority, and long-term royal survival. Harry's very next physical move inside that corridor would decide everything for the night. The state dinner could either begin with absolute royal dignity, or could completely collapse into chaos before the first wine toast was raised. But the very moment the medal left Harry's hand, the first permanent crack in the evening's perfect surface became completely impossible for the palace staff to hide. The first sign of fallout from the missing medal was not a shouted argument, but an empty, heavy pause in the grand dinner procession. Only the trained eyes of the palace staff noticed the last-minute adjusted seating, the whispered corrections, and the deep strain on King Charles's face as he entered the room. The victory felt bitter before the first toast was raised. The king had secured the medal, but not peace. Harry entered the room visibly changed. His posture was stiff, his expression entirely closed, and his silence became a sharp form of protest. The empty space on his jacket where Prince Philip's honor should have been spoke with cruel force to everyone present. Charles lowered his gaze for a single moment before lifting his glass for the official toast. He spoke of duty, friendship, and shared history, but everyone could feel the deep fracture in his own bloodline. The true turning point, however, happened later in a quiet royal passage away from the guests, where Harry and William finally faced each other alone. Stripped of all ceremony, the argument became raw. Harry, his voice broken, told William that losing the medal felt like being systematically erased from their grandfather's memory. William answered with cold, quiet resolve, stating that Philip's memory could not be used to challenge a family code of restraint. Then, William admitted the hidden truth. He had urged the king to issue the command after the Windsor incident. There was no apology and no forgiveness. By morning, the story escaped into public view. Front-page newspapers carried cropped photographs of Harry's bare jacket line under the headline, "The Honor Handed Back." Outside Buckingham Palace, public opinion hardened. Some saw a king defending the crown, while others saw a son stripped of his last connection. In the end, the medal returned to the royal vaults, but the family was permanently altered. Charles had chosen kingship over fatherhood. William chose duty over brotherhood. And Harry learned that memory alone could not protect him from the unyielding demands of crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.